Hello, I'm Graham Taylor and you're watching Potted History. My job is to make replicas, copies of very ancient pots, and to find out how they were made, when they were originally made, the tools that were used, the materials that were used, everything about how those pots were created. And I look at pots from all sorts of different time periods. Today, we're going to be looking at some medieval pots. That's pots from the Middle Ages, as they used to be called. Often when archaeologists dig up pots, they might not be that exciting, do you think? Sometimes they quite broken, little bits, sometimes just a handle. My job is to work out what they looked like when they were originally made and to recreate them in that way. And in front of me on the table here, I've got some pots, and on the shelves behind me. But when I'm doing that, what I try to do is I try to get back into the sort of mind of the potter who originally made them, to imagine myself as a medieval potter. So, shall we have a go at that? And welcome to the 14th century. I'm going to be making some medieval pots. Here are some examples of pots that were found in this area and are in this museum. Sometimes what's called humber ware, quite plain, but other pots, like Scarborough ware, often made with decorations on them. Things like horses, a knight on horseback, or sometimes quite funny little faces. They're made from clay. When that clay comes out the ground, it's quite raw. It's quite rough looking stuff. It's full of stones, full of rocks, full of bits. Hard, solid, really needs to be prepared very carefully. And you start that preparation by crushing it down. And to wet it down, we put it into big pools of water. And after it's been soaking for a couple of weeks, then what you can do is you can get in there and you can mix it up. Fancy playing in the mud? And after it's been drying for a while, it gets to what we call a plastic state. Now, plastic just means mouldable. And this mouldable clay can then be turned into all sorts of pots. And the way that medieval potters would make pot is on a potter's wheel. As I say, this is one I've got in front of me. Now, this is what's called a stick wheel. The clay, ready to go on the wheel. So, let's get started. Lump of clay onto the wheel, and there it is, the stick. And what I'm going to start to do is I'm going to start to spin this wheel with the stick. And if I spin and build up the speed, that heavy, heavy cartwheel will keep on spinning for a little while I can then start to shape the clay. And what I'm doing first is I'm centering the clay. That means I'm pushing the clay towards the middle. Pushing the clay towards the middle so as I can start to shape the pot. And as you can see, it's quite hard work. Off we go, nice and fast. Now what I can start to do is to put a hole down the middle, because that's going to be the opening in the pot. As you can see, it keeps spinning, and it takes quite a lot of force. So at first, it slows the wheel down quite quickly. But as I work on, it gets a little bit easier, because I won't be putting quite so much pressure on the clay each time. So let's raise this up. Now what I'm going to do first is I'm going to make a tall jug, what's called a baluster jug, and I'm going to start that off by drawing the clay upwards and trying to make this cylinder as tall as I possibly can. See how it's growing? One of the most famous pottery places in Yorkshire in the medieval period, in the Middle Ages, was Scarborough. In Scarborough they made very fine, excellent, green glazed pottery. But at places like Beverley, Cowick, Potter Newton and Potter Brompton tell you all you really need to know, don't they? Drawing that clay up again. Now every time I do this, the wall of the pot is getting a little thinner and the pot's getting a little taller, but it still takes quite a while to draw it upwards. Now during the medieval period there are big settlements, big towns growing up, and those big towns have enough people living there to make it worth having potters with potter's wheels and kilns, of course, because the thing is, once you've made your pot on the potter's wheel, clay's soft, soggy stuff, wet material. To make it solid enough to last a few hundred years, it needs to be what we call fired. And by fired, I mean it's put into an oven and it's heated up. And it's heated up until the pots glow bright yellow. Well over, in many cases, 1,000 degrees centigrade. And that was done in kilns, fired with wood. Wood stoked in at the bottom, at the front in a firebox. The flames passing up through into what's called the chamber where the pots are kept. Now what I'm going to do with this before it's finished is I'm going to put it back onto the potter's wheel and throw it upside down. Right, let's get this off the wheel. Round we go. Trim up the bottom. And how am I going to cut it off? With a piece of string. Piece of twisted string underneath the bottom, through underneath. And then what I can do is I can lift that pot off the wheel and onto the board at the side here. Now this pot's been drying for a little while. It was thrown on the wheel yesterday, so I'm going to turn that upside down onto here. That'll do the job. Medieval potters never really worried too much as to whether things were bang on centre or not. They would make them in quite a rough and ready sort of way. And if you look at pots in museums, you'll quite often see that with medieval pots. They're a little bit wobbly, they're a little bit bendy. Here we go. Let's just make sure that's in the middle. Yes, it is. Or it's near the middle as it needs to be. I'm just going to make a hole in it. Look at that. I'm going to speed this up a little bit. And I don't want it going too fast this time. If it's going too fast, it might well fly off the wheel, and I don't want that happening. So a bit of water. And now what I start to do is to thin it down up this end. Getting it nice and centred. That means so as it's going round and round the middle of the wheel nice and evenly, so as I'm not going to have it wobbling about. But as I say, medieval potters often didn't worry too much about that. There, it's coming up now. And it makes a much taller, much lighter pot. Now, I want a little knife out of here. What I'm going to do with that is I'm just going to tidy up the very top edge of this. Or maybe I should say the very bottom edge, because that's what it is now, of course. It's the bottom edge of the pot. And that's got to go onto a false base. So I'm going to turn it over. So I've got myself a board and another piece of clay. This is going to form the base of the pot. And to pick this up, there we go. It's quite soft, so I have to be gentle with it. Over we go and onto there. And then, if I'm very gentle, I put this onto here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go round and I'm going to thumb that into place. So it seals the bottom together, but it also sort of makes a bit of a decorative feature as I go round. You see that? We're getting that joined together and pressing the clay into place. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to trim it up a little bit. So again, with my knife, round we go. Just trim nice and close to there. That's good. Take away the spare clay. And that's the base of my pot. There it is. This is one of the pots that I made on my potter's wheel. I've altered the shape a little bit at the top and finishing it off because I want it to look like what's called the Eton vase, which is in Hull Museum. And the Eton vase, which you can see in the corner of the screen now, is a pot that was made at the end of the 13th or beginning of the 14th century. And it's a green glazed pot. It's called a vase, but it's actually a jug. It's what you'd call a pitcher. And actually it's got a spout. This one here is one from Dublin, a replica of one that was found in Dublin. And that one also has a spout. You might be able to see it's in the form of a dragon's head in this case. But the Eton vase has a spout. So I'm going to start off by putting on that spout. But even before I do that, I'm going to just here, I'm going to wet that a little bit. And I'm going to scratch it a little bit. There we go. This is just to make it so that my pot will stick together nicely. There we go. I put in some slip on there. And I'm going to stick this little bit of clay onto there. And you'll see why in a few minutes. And I'm going to push it back, really push it on, and leave my finger impressions in there to decorate, like we were talking about on the bottom of the pots when I was doing them on the wheel. They've done it up there, around there like that. And I think I'm going to chop that off around about there-ish. Let's just cut that off like that and we'll leave it hanging there for a minute. Because to make the spout, I've made myself a flat slab of clay. There's my flat slab of clay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap that around a stick, in this case the handle of a wooden spoon, because that's a really nice straight stick for me to wrap that around. And I'm just going to start to join those edges together a little bit. And then I'm going to trim the bottom end. And then what I'm also going to do is just there, I'm going to make a hole so that this jug will pour. I'm going to scratch that up like that. And wet that like that. Remember, we're talking about wetting and sticking. And I'm going to put that on to there, like that. So as it goes a little bit more upright and so as it's really well stuck together. And we're going to have that bit of decoration at the bottom again. And all that will get nicely smoothed into the spout. And then finally, what I'm going to do to make that now into the spout is I'm going to twist that round, pull it out, And then on this side, it's going to have a handle. So again, nicely in line with the spout, so as it comes right here. And on the etten vase, the spout, the handle goes right down to down here. Bit of water, make it sticky. Take the piece of clay I've got ready to make the handle here. Now I'm going to have to stand up for this again. There we go. Let's go up there. Push that into place. And then once it's on there, I'm going to draw it back out again so that it makes a nice long handle to go onto this jug. Make sure I've got plenty handle to go on there. There we go. Into place, and I put my hand right down inside to stop me squashing the pot as I'm pressing this on. And it's going to go onto the side like that. Nicely firmly smoothed in and fixed on. And the last job, we'll go round and we'll do those finger marks again. The potter that made this really liked finger marks pressed into the clay. And it's their sort of signature. It's left there for all time. Hundreds of years later, you can still come back and you can still see where the potter took their finger and pressed it into the clay. And I've got one other pot I want to show you how to make. And this time it's a little bit more elaborate pot, a little bit more complicated, but there's part of it that I want you to have a go at. The other pot I want to show you is this one. A rather fatter, rounder pot than the other one I made. But we're going to put some figures on this one. You've seen this strange pot standing next to me. This is called an aquamanile. And an aquamanile is a water pouring jug, specifically for people to wash their hands. Not so as your hands were clean because of germs, because we know that's a good idea now, don't we? But because you had to have your hands clean before you said your prayers, and you would say your prayers before you ate your food. So this was a washing jug, so as you could have clean hands to say your prayers. An aquamanile, really good word. But it's in the shape of a knight. Now, that's what we're going to put onto this jug. First, I need to put the handle on. So I'm going to put the handle on first, and then we'll put a knight onto here. So I've got a lump of clay. I'm going to wet that there. I'm going to give this a little bit of a scratch. There we go. The same up there. Make that a bit sticky. Push that on there. I'm going to have to stand up for this. Put that there for a second. Get the clay nice and wet. I'm going to make this one quite flattish. Make this quite a flattish handle. A bit more water. And then I'm going to put it down onto there. And maybe like the etten vase, we'll give it a little bit of decoration around the edges. Make that handle nice and neat. All right. Whole museum has a few bits of Scarborough ware, of decorated Scarborough ware with faces and things on it. What I'd like you to do is I'd like you to watch what I'm going to do now and have a think, because I think it would be a good idea at the end of this, if you've got some plasticine or some Play-Doh or some air drying clay, or proper clay if you know somebody who has proper clay, for you to have a go at possibly making your own knight. Not the whole jug, just the knight to go on the jug, or possibly a face to go on the jug. The sorts of things that went on here. But I'm going to start off by putting a knight onto this jug in the same way that potters used to in the medieval times. So I'm going to wet this surface down a little bit, get it a bit sticky. There we go, just a dip of water, get it on the surface there. Because with ordinary clay, with proper clay, it's the water, it's the stickiness of the surface that makes it hold together. If you're using plasticine, or you're going to be using air drying clay or Play-Doh, you probably don't need to do all the wetting. You probably don't need all the water on there. But for this I do. Okay, let's go. I've got some lumps of clay here, and the knights that they often put onto these jugs and the horses that they put onto the jugs that the knights were riding often don't look very horse-like or very knight-like, quite honestly. They look a bit cartoonish. So we can do it the way we want to do it. And I'm going to start off with a lump of clay that I'm going to roll out, and I'm going to make into the body of a horse and the neck of a horse. Now, with my jug here, what I have to do is I have to get my arm inside there, and I have to make sure that as I press this on here, I'm not going to dent the jug in. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring that up there. That's going to be my horse's neck and my horse's head. Let's have some legs. Horse's legs. Sometimes you think when you look at the original ones of these that maybe the people who'd made them never seen a horse, which is unlikely because they had lots and lots and lots of horses, I'm sure. That's going on there, like that. And then I've got some little tools here. I've got some wooden tools, bits of antler, bits of bone, things that can be used as medieval tools. You can use whatever you can get. Just make sure if you're doing it at home, make sure that there's an adult who's happy for you to use the things that you're using. And I'm going to give it a bit of a mane, and maybe there we'll give it a bit of an eye, and maybe give it a mouth. There we go. That's quite good. Let's do an armour covered knight. So here we go. We've got a body, and he needs to sit high on the horse, doesn't he? High up on the horse, like that. And then very, very long legs on some of them. Legs that are so long they come almost to the ground. We'll give him long, long legs, and maybe we'll give him a little pointy, long pointy shoes. And then he needs a helmet. What shaped helmet shall we have? Well, let's have one of those ones that's sort of shaped a bit like a bucket, shall we? How can we tell it's a helmet? Well, let's give it a slit for the eyes. And shall we give him some breathing holes at the front? And maybe a row of rivets at the top, holding the top of the helmet on, and perhaps some coming down that hold the helmet together. And he's going to need a shield, and they quite often have quite long shields. So I'm just going to get a piece of clay like that, pointy piece of clay, and I need an arm that's holding that shield. So let's have an arm coming back here and going forwards there. And over the top of that, we'll put his shield. And I think in his other arm, give him a hand, sword. I think the last thing I'm going to do is to give this horse a bit of a tail. But that's pretty much the knight made. What do you think? I've put the other knight onto my jug now. So we've got one on each side. But the one thing that I wanted to do was just to finish off this handle, because there's something that's on some of the jug handles in the museum here in Hull, and they're a bit funny. They've got 2 little rings up there, and in the middle of those rings, little dots, and then on here a little round button like that, and then a little mouth and a beard, because these are quite jolly little faces on there. So there we are, jug done. Knights on both sides, face on there, knight on the other side. Now that I've made my pots, I've got to let them dry. Then they have to be coated in what we call the glaze, and then they have to go in the kiln. Now the glaze that's going to go on these is going to make this wonderful green colour, this green coloured pottery. And that glaze is made from some interesting things. Let's move that to one side. It's made partly from this. This is what's called lead ore or galena. These black bits here, these dark bits in this rock, are what would make lead. If it was treated in a furnace and melted down, you'd get lead from that. Now, it's a poisonous metal. Lead is poisonous, so you have to be very careful with it. But they used to grind this down, and when it had been ground down, you end up with a blackish, greyish sort of powder, very fine blackish greyish powder, and that will melt clay. So if you mix that with powdered clay and mix the two together, what you get is you get a glassy surface on the pots, but it's sort of clear, and that leaves the pots looking greyish brownish colour. So what medieval potters used to do is they used to add to it some copper. But copper's another metal, isn't it? Copper's a shiny metal. But copper, if it's left wet for a long time, particularly if it's a bit acidy with things like vinegar or stuff like that, it starts to corrode, it starts to rot down a little bit, and what you get is copper oxide. And when that copper oxide breaks down, you end up with something called copper carbon. That's all very complicated science, isn't it? But what it means is, from shiny golden metal, you end up with a greenish sort of powder. And if this greenish powder is mixed with this crushed down lead ore and is mixed with clay and put onto the surface of the pot and then is heated up so as the pots glow bright orange in the kiln up to over 1,000 degrees centigrade, what you end up with is a wonderful green glaze. And that's what's going to happen to these pots. They're going to end up with a green glaze on. Now, how about you see what you can do? I bet you can make a better night than I did. Give it a go. Here's George, 6 years old, making his night on horseback.